Hello, and thank you for being here. I'm coming to you from West Hartford, Connecticut in the United States. I'm privileged to have this opportunity to discuss my original research, as well as the insights I gained in the process. Connections appeared, and perhaps there might be a place for this information in practice, as well as the general body of knowledge. Here's the agenda for today's talk. As you notice, I disappeared from the lower right-hand corner. I intend to take no more than 15-20 minutes of your time, so let's jump right in by talking about the problem. I'm talking about a bit of an abstract concept here, the idea of facility effectiveness beyond quality and compliant. What we want to know basically is to what extent does a built environment meet its human designed mission? And what are the factors in particular settings that contribute to that effectiveness? Effectively, does the facility facilitate? Listed here are a bunch of barriers that seem to be in place right now that limit the ability for a facility to be fully effective. Limited budgets, deferred maintenance, a lack of connection between management practices and business goals. So hopefully today I'll talk about ways to help solve that problem. Right now we're stuck in a problem of deteriorating spaces, a greater sense in society of a need for value from consumers and others, and a lack of capacity to make those effective connections. I believe the path forward lies in both how we approach the problem and refining our target objectives. As you see here, think differently. To me, it describes both a cause and an effect. On the one hand, we need to cause our practitioners to think differently in how they make decisions, prioritize funds and resource allocations, and envision the future. On the other hand, the goal of such a shift in how practitioners think is to influence how space users think, the effect. So we want to affect their experience, and that starts with their thoughts as they drive other desired responses. A little bit about me. I describe myself as a researcher, educator, and entrepreneur these days. I'm currently managing the launch of 2 new companies. You notice that on the left-hand side, each with a focus on consulting in the built and constructed environment space. I've been an adjunct professor at the University of Hartford for 11 years, and I usually teach 3 classes a year across different semesters. Right now, I'm teaching professional ethics to juniors and senior undergraduates. Just last September, I left what had been a 25-year career at U of H. I was responsible for the entirety of campus operations when I left and had roles all over the place throughout the years. I found what a lot of people found, which is that a college campus is a microcosm of a real town or a city. Certainly there are differences, but they have residential facilities, teaching facilities, dining facilities. I mean, everything you could imagine, performance venues, sports, as well as a vibrant interconnectedness with those buildings, grounds and walkways and pathways and outdoor activity spaces. So it was 10 years ago in the context of this that I decided I wanted to know more about the effect of my job on that university. So I enrolled in the doctoral program there and ended up doing my dissertation using that campus's population as my research population. I did a mixed methods study that included a survey with over 800 responses. A subset of those respondents submitted photos describing elements that influenced their experience, and another subset were interviewed. So as I said, as a practitioner, I wanted to know specifically that if I had a limited amount of money, where would that money be best spent? Where would it have the most impact? And when thinking about that impact, what do we want that impact to be? And how do we want people to respond? The lens through which I did my research, I used Bittner's Servicescape framework, which is included in the references at the end. The Servicescape model describes the interconnectedness of 3 environmental dimensions of every facility: the ambient conditions, the spatial layout and functionality, as well as the implicit and explicit communicators that all influence space users' moods, attitudes, responses, and behaviors. Those environmental dimensions consist of distinct individual elements within them. So the model suggests that each of these distinct elements have the ability to influence the reactions of customers, employees, particularly in a servant setting, but also all sorts of other constituents. You know, as a practitioner, I had the very unique opportunity to experience in my setting being a student, professor, and an administrator all on the same day and on the same campus. That experience, sort of in quotes, as it related to the facilities was unique for me, depending upon what particular role I was in. So for example, one request was for supplemental outlets in a classroom to charge electronic devices. That request coming to me was sort of on the one hand a bit burdensome because it's a request for additional dollars and time and resources. But on the other hand, I don't want my laptop dying in the middle of my stats final either. So, how somebody will respond to a request as simple as supplemental outlets in a classroom is not automatic. It's going to vary depending upon someone's campus role and perspective of its importance. And it's this kind of varied influence, as well as those responses across a wide spectrum of folks, right, in various positions and roles that are all interconnected with a unique, these unique mission-built facilities and structures. It's those responses that we're trying to unpack. Right, in this case, the power supply was fully effective in the sense that it worked. It provided the power. There were sufficient outlets to meet code and accessibility and all that sorts of stuff. The wiring was solid and quality, yet it still fell short. A fully functional classroom with all the necessary elements to support teaching and learning had a major barrier there. And in this specific example, without me also being a student, I may have underestimated the need and added it to the list. Instead, it was clear that additional power would meet a customer need and undoubtedly enhance the experience of many space users, really ultimately adding value to that teaching and learning process through that just one small thing. So this really drives the essential question in my mind, as I said before, how do we derive maximum benefit and our value from our built and constructed spaces? One of the best things that happened in my career was to better understand the research related to my field of facilities management, to learn how to do a literature review, to find out what is known on a topic or area of inquiry, understand conceptual frameworks and grounding practice with theory and vice versa. So again, the key notion for today and the key objectives is the word effective. We'll get more into that, but how do we reimagine our facilities to be more effective? When Bittner in her Servicescape framework describes individual elements and their influence, it is the influence in a moment in time, right, based on current conditions. Somebody walks into a space, what do they see, what do they feel, what do they hear, how do they move through it? So the key questions there to consider are, what are the factors that resulted in that moment in time? And what was the impact of that moment in time? In my estimation, those factors make up the DNA of a built environment. I use the term DNA intentionally because I think it helps illustrate two main things. The first is that facilities and built environments are alive. They're ever-changing, dynamic, and so are their users and needs and tastes and attitudes and those sorts of things. The second is the elemental parts and pieces of a facility are interconnected and joined to form something completely new and different, with sometimes only slight variations, but they produce different results. In the case of DNA, right, hair color, height, whatever, through a small change, it influences that outcome. Like DNA, in a facility, parts can be tailored or altered to achieve specific results. It is estimated that humans spend 90% of their time indoors, and of the remaining 10%, up to 90% of that is spent in some kind of built or constructed environment. Think parks, roadways, walkways, outdoor air stadiums, things like that, playgrounds. Each one of those is made by humans and for humans, and conceived and built for some specific purpose. Shelter, worship, activity, storage, housing, whatever it happens to be. They're all purpose-built, purpose-conceived spaces. Unsurprisingly, right, everyone has a strong influence on their users. Mental and physical, health, well-being, individual and organizational outcomes, all those sorts of things are shown in lots of extensive research to be influenced by the built environment and the facilities. So they're very powerful and very influential. Facilities are also the highest valued asset in organizations and generally occupy the highest percentage of the operating budget. So the notion that a facility is extremely influential, it's extremely expensive, and it has extremely high value really seems to highlight an opportunity for organizations and others to make the most of them. So the DNA, as I see it, of a built environment is essentially the sum total of inputs, outputs, and responses, all three of those things. So those factors that go into creating that facility in that moment of time, the effect that those facilities have on space users, and then the responses that people have to that collection of outputs, that collection of influences. How do they respond, react? What are their choices afterwards? At any moment, a physical facility or built space reflects that moment in time, right? The sum total of those inputs. And I think about them as people, places, and processes. And basically what you see as a moment in time is that configuration of the efforts of all the people interacting with whatever processes are in place to create that place. Maybe it's a space, maybe it's a place, but this photo here illustrates kind of what I'm talking about. So this photo was sent to me as part of my research project, and the person who submitted the photo described it in the caption as, "This makes us look so backward and so behind the times as a school." So this was taken from a classroom at the University of Hartford, and you'll see that there is sort of emblazoned on the side of it, "Do not remove." Well, it's an overhead projector. Overhead projectors have been outdated forever. They're not generally used, but these were in every single classroom at the University of Hartford. We didn't even think about it. So the people who were interacting in those spaces noticed this device, but whether it's a professor or a facilities person or somebody thought we shouldn't remove it, so it got stuck in a corner, covered with papers, and this device was influencing the experience of a student in there, right? So, I mean, they could have taken a photo of everything, anything. She said this influenced her experience and chose this to share. It wasn't on anyone's radar, and a student reported a negative response and a negative experience, right? So what do we do about that? How do we create and influence the people, the places, and the processes to ensure that all that's inputted into a facility is as effective as possible? Bittner describes those outputs, the results of people, places, and processes interacting, as falling into three general categories, right? I described them before. The ambient conditions, the way it feels in a space, those influences to your physiology, things you see, hear, feel, temperature, those sorts of things. The spatial layout and functionality, how a space behaves. In the case of the overhead projector, this person was describing a less than functional experience in the classroom because of outdated technology. It was communicating to her outdated ideas, a lack of any real process to configure classrooms in the most effective way possible. And then the third category of Bittner was communicators. What are those stories that elements of the facilities are telling us? Sometimes they're very intentional, as noted here with the exit sign. The story of the security cameras is, okay, we have a safe campus. So all these elements sort of fall into these three buckets with varying influence in each of them, right? So they send signals, they provide functionality and space flow, and then they influence our experience from a physiological standpoint. So human responses emanate from the totality and configuration of all these outputs, right? The spatial, the communicators, the ambient conditions. And what you see here are kind of a bunch of submissions that came through my research that describe the way spaces are making people feel, make them think, their physical feeling, how they make them feel socially. Do they advance or inhibit those kinds of things? And the way Bittner talks about them is either sort of creating or crafting approach behaviors or avoidance behaviors, right? Do these things sufficiently drive me to recommend this place, to come back, to affiliate, or do those things drive me to say, no way, I'm going to tell other people not to come here. It doesn't feel safe. It doesn't feel inclusive. It doesn't look like they care. I don't feel like I'm getting value for my money. So you'll see up at the right-hand corner, there's a crosswalk there, and you see at the end of that crosswalk is a curb. And the individual who sent this photo said, I feel like the university doesn't care about me. And not only that, I was stuck in the middle of this crosswalk with cars beeping at me, and I didn't know what to do. So this is basically just an illustration of the way facilities impact and affect people and shape their responses, either in a positive way or a negative way. So building on what we know about sort of the way facilities behave and the elements that can go into them to make them as positive as possible, I consider this sort of a work in progress, but it's the concept of an effectiveness framework for facilities. What we've learned, what I've learned is those most effective facilities and spaces align with the goals and objectives. They generate positive responses intentionally among users. They facilitate those responses. And they really work to reduce negative experiences. You can't always predict and deal with failures, but when they happen, how you respond to them can have a huge impact on how users feel and how they respond. So basically, the effectiveness framework concept works to align a lot of site-specific inputs, align them, craft them, shape them so that they sort of have the best chance at deriving desired human responses. So ultimately, for any organization, I mean, you want to find value and you want to be able to extract value out of this effort. So, beyond simply deciding that I want to shape user responses to better align, you have to think about how to do it and then which of those are going to provide the most value. So targeting what you want those desired thoughts, feelings, and behaviors to be. It's going to be unique for any kind of an organization. In an educational organization or a library or a sports facility or a store, your desired outcomes for those people using the space are going to be unique and different. Also remembering that there are a lot of constituents to think about. So there are customers, there are employees, there are visitors, donors, managers, bosses, investors. I mean, there are all sorts of targets. So, who are the desired people? Who are the people that you want to target and work to shape their thoughts, feelings, and behaviors? You do that once you've sort of thought about what your targets are. You got to now identify what those discrete elements are that are going to engineer those responses. Sometimes it's as simple as walking across a space and just sort of looking at it with fresh eyes, having people, give you insights and input into what's annoying to them, what's frustrating, what's a detractor. And then you come up with what's easy, a coat of paint. Sometimes just the way you post signs has a lot to do with the way people experience a space. In my research, I developed two tools, the ICEEQ and the IBEEA. The first one is an individual response. It's the survey I used, and I wanted to know which environmental elements influenced folks' experience on that campus. And then the other one is a more building-specific tool to identify elements in the building that are effective. And I have 11 dimensions in that second one that I use to evaluate building effectiveness, from inclusivity and diversity to appearance and condition, functionality, those sorts of things. So those two tools allow us to solicit information from stakeholders as well as gather information from the built environment themselves. The third pinnacle there, the pillar there, would be the processes that connect the people and the places. Finding new data streams is very interesting. So, one element that I can focus on right now is air quality. Indoor air quality in the context of Corona is a very new thing. We have to start thinking about shared air. We have to start thinking about rebreathing other people's air indoors, because that seems to be the way this virus spreads. So how do you do that? I've talked to lots of folks that describe, well, we have a commissioned air quality program here, so we don't need to do anything. And, it meets all the standards, ASHRAE and all the other organizations, but that system is not effective because it doesn't account for this new idea of, oh my gosh, I don't want to be infected and I don't want to breathe other people's air. So how do we develop a new data stream to inform schools and other businesses that will give them some insight into health and safety conditions, safe conditions, intelligent methodologies for operations to, understand how to target and plan for renewal and planning and looking forward. Again, I would suggest that attention to the people's, places, and processes and looking at how to best tailor those responses can help build that methodology. And lastly, there you'll see strategic facilities management. Again, compared with operational facilities management, moving organizations from reactive to proactive is a big part of helping people have a better experience. So, we're reaching the end of the 20 minutes that I promised you here, and I know I've blasted through it, but, here are basically the key takeaways, right? And I put them in bold. Effective facilities tightly align organizational, individual goals, objectives, and outcomes with user responses. What do we want people to feel, think, and how do we want them to behave? A recognition that all facilities are made by humans and for humans and are constantly in motion. Things fail, break, fade, get worn out, tastes change. So the notion that we have to keep up with that to tailor and craft our physical spaces to meet the needs of our constituents isn't a new idea, but maybe in this concept it might be. The notion that human responses emanate from the influence generated by the totality of our facilities and the configuration that we humans put into place. Our body of knowledge informs the specific influence of all these various discrete facility elements, room temperature, lighting, functionality, all those sorts of things. That information is out there and should be used, and it should be gathered and applied into these situations. And then realizing where there are gaps. Understand where you have gaps, so you need to gather site-specific information maybe, or some other method. And again, the opposite, right? Less effective facilities negatively influence their users and their misaligned responses. And then you don't extract value from your spaces, right? So, your job as a facility manager, as a researcher, as a practitioner is to in my view, how to better align spaces with desired responses. And you see the very last one is the summary of everything, right? The effectiveness framework attempts to find that value by leveraging the facility to shape user thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. So in an effort to keep this to around 20 minutes, it looks like we're at about 21 minutes right now. I wanted to try to fly through some things, but I realized that maybe the full message didn't get across. So I encourage you to look through these references here. If you want to learn more, some about the way that I've shaped my thinking and the stuff that's contributed to my practice right now and my work at the University of Hartford. I'd love to connect with anybody that's interested in learning more, just talking through the subject. As I said, this is very much a work in progress. It's a working idea, this effectiveness framework, as well as the people, places, processes framework that I think contributes as inputs to the state of a particular facility. So again, I want to thank everybody, University of Calgary, everybody else that helped make this happen. I appreciate it very much and hopefully you enjoyed the presentation. Have a great day.